What's the scariest weird supernatural thing you've ever experienced? About 20 years ago, while living in the first house I owned, I was sitting and watching TV late at night. My youngest son, about 3 or 4 at the time, came out of his room and said, "Dad, come see the lady in my room." I said, "What?" And he said, "There's an old lady in my room." I was a little freaked out as I always felt something strange in the house. I went with him to his room and there was nothing there. My son said, "She's gone now." I asked him where he saw her and he said she come out of the wall. I was about 10 I think, and got woken up around 2 AM by what sounded like a man breathing loudly from somewhere in my bedroom. After being frozen in fear, I ran out and all the way to my parents' room where I woke my dad up. He was confused and disoriented but agreed to come see back there with me. We got there and sat on my bed for about a minute and listened. It seemed like it was gone and I was just about to convince myself that it was a dream or an artifact of partial wakefulness. But then the breathing returned. I stared at my dad and watched his face and it was very clear it was not his breathing. And he was definitely hearing it too. After the moment of surprise, he started searching my room. By the time he had looked everywhere, it stopped. Concert. He then searched the rest of the house and even walked around outside with a flashlight checking out the area near my window especially. It was not a windy night and my room never had any noises from drafts ever. We never found out what the breathing was and both still remember it. It never happened again. The thing that creeps me out the most now is that there was only one place we didn't think to check, and that was the attic, which connected to my room through a sealed hatch in the ceiling. But maybe that was thin enough to hear someone through. Bruh, the last part sent shivers down my spine. I posted this a few years back and since I'm a lazy butt I'ma just copy and paste my previous post. So here goes. Crazy demon tree story repost. Let me preface this by saying I am one of the most skeptical people you'll ever meet. I'm not religious. I don't believe in ghosts or aliens, in the come to earth abductions etc sense. There's probably a good chance there's life out there somewhere in the vastness of space, or any of that. This is the weirdest thing I've ever encountered and I have no real logical explanation for it. No drugs or booze were involved. My friends and I went camping up in the White Mountains of NH most summers in middle and high school and a few years after till life happened and we all went our ways. Now being a bunch of unorganized teen boys man children, we always took forever to get in gear and actually get going. Usually not leaving southern MA where we lived until late afternoon, early evening. One year we got up there about 10 PM or so and decided rather than hike into the woods we'd just sort of camp crash out in the parking lot and hike in the AM. After a bit of unwinding and some food, everyone went to bed except for me and one other dude. We ended up wandering over to a small wooden footbridge over a river. It was a perfectly clear night filled with stars and a fairly bright moon, and we were shooting the breeze for a good couple hours about all sorts of stuff, movies, games, life, etc, etc. It had to be well after midnight by this point. As we were chatting we both got this creepy feeling of something being there and it was sinister. Looking at the far end of the bridge there was this massive, dead tree, no leaves, just clawing branches, silhouetted against the sky. We both were like, man, I swear that tree is creeping me out. But that's silly, right? At first we tried to dismiss it as silly but both of us kept feeling more and more unnerved until I finally was like, screw this, I'm a grown man. I'm not afraid of a dang tree. I'ma walk over there. I get like 2/3 RDS of the way across the bridge and it feels like something reached in and grabbed my pounding heart. Just went totally ice cold. I backed up and was like, yeah, I'm afraid of a tree. I seriously think I'm not coming back if I go over there. We retreated from the bridge and decided to go to bed back in the sleeping bags by the car. Next morning, after breakfast, we decide to hike into the trail by going across that bridge. Halfway across, my friend freezes. Oh, dude. I look across the bridge. It's a clearing. There's no trees there. Oh dude, it's nothing to worry about. What you thought was a tree was actually a heck beast pretending to be one to snatch you up and drag you to heck. But don't worry, it was definitely not a tree. I totaled my car in a bad collision. It was my fault. I wasn't paying attention and thought the car ahead of me was moving faster than it was. I ended up rear-ending someone, and then I panicked and turned into a telephone pole, trashing my car. In the end, everyone was okay and no one was hurt except me. I broke my thumb and pulled some muscles. The weird part was immediately after the crash, the airbags deployed and I was out of it for a second. It felt like I was in a dream. People came to my door and pulled me out and asked repeatedly, "Is there anyone else in the car with you?" I answered, "Yes, my sister," but I was driving alone, and my sister died when I was 4. I don't know why I said that. I have another sister, but in my mind for a moment I clearly thought that my dead sister was in the passenger seat. I believed it so much I was telling strangers. Then I quickly adjusted, realized what had happened, and assured everyone I was driving alone and was just flustered. I've had other moments where a stranger is inexplicably kind to me when I really needed it, or moments when I've been down and alone and for some reason it feels like my sister is with me, keeping me company. It probably all boils down to my childhood trauma coping skills, but it also feels sweet to remember and honor my sister. I don't believe in ghosts. Woman with dementia was sundowning at the witching hour pretty hard, flailing around her walker, screeching, causing a ruckus. Got some noise complaints. Very gently I start the task of heading her back to her room. Halfway down the hall she goes completely still, turns around, looks past me and points a shaking bony finger. "He's right behind you," she whispered. Nope, 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 frick that. I essentially carried her to the bathroom in her apartment, did the toileting real fast, helped her back into bed. Night night. Not long after I returned from a combat deployment, I woke up in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 a.m., to find my then 4-year-old son standing in our bedroom and staring out the window that overlooked our front yard. I sat up and said, "What you doing, bud?" In a very flat voice, he said, "Watching those men, Daddy. They're digging your grave." I got up quickly and looked out the window, where of course there was no one. I hurried him back to his bedroom, and he went immediately back to sleep. He is grown now and has no recollection of it, but it creeped me out that night. This is freaking scary. My living room is a huge mirror which reflects the passage doorway. I was around 11-12 years old when I was looking into it and brushing my hair for school. I was just about to tie it up when I saw a white figure walk past my door. I knew it was my grandmother and that she is just showing us that she's still present, but my god did it scare the frick out of me. I love how people in this post are so casual. It's just my dead grandma. Some people here have wills of steel. One time I was going home in my car and saw a guy that appeared to have no arms, no hair and a longest neck in just a hoodie, no pants, no underwear, trying to climb a tree in the woods with their legs, and I don't know if that's paranormal, but it was such a freaking weird experience that I think it qualifies. Yeah, I had a similar experience. If I remember rightly, he was sat in the basket of this kid's bike and there were loads of sinister government guy pointing walkie-talkies everywhere. Sleep paralysis demons. Imagine dreaming so lucidly that it feels like you're awake. I would dream that I was my room, but in the dark, or my closet was the girl from The Grudge. I couldn't move in my dream, was just frozen in position, would blink my eyes in my dream, and with every blink she would come closer. Eventually she would be on top of me and strangle me. I would try screaming but no sound would escape. Eventually I would wake up and spend the night with the lights on, but even then, I would enter the exact same dream just fully lit. She hated me, and really was nourished by the fear and terror I gave off. The scariest part is that we all share the same experience with sleep paralysis. It was never Santa coming to give me a hug, always Shadow Man or the old hag witch, and it was always malicious. Scary F. I had it every night for years. When I was a kid I had my own room. I was maybe 8 or 9 at this time. I was sitting alone at the table that was in the room and reading a book. I started to hear a cacophony of voices around me, and they were very distinct voices. They were saying things that I just couldn't make out because they were all talking over each other. They were voices of all different pitches. I got up to put the book I was reading back on my bookshelf, and that's when I felt a breeze passed by me, and one of the little knickknacks on the bookshelf fell off, and at the same time I heard a very loud voice saying, "Hey you," and they said my name. I bolted out of that room so fast. Woke up one morning to this. It was broad daylight. Sunlight was coming in, but I heard what sounded like a full-blown cocktail party taking place in my bedroom. Not exactly sinister in feeling, different voices, men and women, different pitches and tones. When I was almost fully awake, I could hear them all simultaneously say things like shh, she's waking up, shh, there she is. So the building where I interned at had 5 floors, and the office I worked was on the 5th floor, so I took the elevator to come and go. One day when I was leaving, a UPS guy had just dropped off a package on my floor, had got into the elevator with me. He had very distinct long curly hair. He stops and gets off at the 3rd floor to deliver a package, and I continue my trip down. So I exit the elevator on the ground floor, and the door to the building, about 20 feet away, and as I walk outside, the same guy W the hair is getting in the UPS truck and driving away. I spent the entire rest of the day trying to think about how he could have done that. There was another elevator, but they moved at the same speed, so even if he dropped off the package immediately and the elevator was waiting for him, I should at least have seen him walking out the door to the building, right? The other possibility is that he took the stairs, but he would have had to sprint down 3 flights of stairs and out the door to beat me, which he would have had to do in like 7-8 seconds. Maybe this isn't supernatural, but I still can't explain it. My best friend died from an asthma attack in front of me and his family when I was 11. Super traumatic experience. He passed away maybe around 6-7 in the evening. The following morning really early, maybe 6 to 7 am, I awoke to my dogs barking, both lab mixes, very aggressively, and charged for my room, and my door flung wide open. I remember feeling my friend's presence like I knew he was there. I got so scared I got chills, curled up into a ball near the wall, and was too afraid to turn around and look. My dogs stayed there barking as the door flung open for about 10 seconds, then completely stopped. I regret not looking. I will always remember that moment. I know he was there. I'm so sorry. That's terrible. I had bad asthma as a child. Still do. The medicines are strong enough now though. My asthma is usually allergy related, so I now have an EpiPen I carry everywhere with my inhaler. I had close calls. Story time. When I was a teenager, I was visiting my family in the north of Portugal with a bunch of friends. We decided to explore a supposedly haunted manor at night. The construction of said manor was halted after multiple fatalities occurred in its premises. The architect and 2 workers died in strange circumstances. Local village superstition kicked in, and people were reluctant to ever set foot in there. A couple of years later, of the family members who wanted to complete the building died on site while assessing the building. Then it was left to rot for decades. Wilderness took over. Vines were covering most of the walls, and the gardens were a jungle of weeds. From a distance, it looked eerie by daylight and absolutely terrifying after sunset. Legends about that cursed mansion were rampant, and probably wildly exaggerated. None of us believe in the supernatural, so we basically grabbed a torch and went straight in. What we didn't know is that my older cousin and his older friends overheard our plans to investigate the house by night, and decided to beat us there and scare the ever-living crap out of us. They hid in the mansion and upon our arrival, made sinister noises, moved debris around, created misshapen shadows and whispered words of terror. With a single torch, it was almost impossible to figure out what was going on, and we were obviously scared shitless. After what seemed an eternity of torturous fear, my cousin revealed himself after we fled to the upper floor of the mansion. He had covered himself with a white sheet to pass as a ghost. His other mates soon came out of hiding, and after a lengthy stream of mockery, insults, and, ultimately, laughter, we started to clear the premises. Did I mention the house was unfinished? As we were moving out of the place, my cousin kept making fun of us, prancing around and covered with that white sheet. The stairs had no railing. The fall broke his spine and he died in ambulance on the way to Porto. I still do not believe in the supernatural, but that was yet another victim of that place. I passed by again this summer, more than 20 years later. Nothing has changed. The mansion remains unfinished. Jesus, I'm so sorry, but weird as frick, someone else passed BC of that place. My cousin and I, who is a year older than I am, were in my grandmother's basement all alone, playing mini golf with my grandfather's golf clubs. My grandmother called us up for a snack. We were 8 and 9 years old. We drank orange juice, fed her parakeets, had some biscuits and went back into the basement. All of the golf clubs were bent in half, every single one, and the basement was a mess. My grandmother, my cousin, and myself were the only people there. She couldn't have bent them in her feeble state, and neither of us left each other's sight. We didn't hear anything and were probably gone for 20-30 minutes. Everyone in the family thought it was ghosts that did it. It's been a mystery. I'm a non-believer, but this is one of about a dozen weird instances in this house. It was built near downtown Salt Lake in the 1920s. My father grew up there after they emigrated from England. Still can't figure it out. Someone must have slipped in and bent them. But who, how, and why? I stayed in a hotel in Sentosa in Singapore which was called the Barracks Hotel and used to be a British military army officer barracks during World War II. I woke up just as we were nodding off, screaming knife to the throat. Of course my partner was terrified. I was having a full-on vision of being executed by bayonet at the hands of a Japanese army officer on my knees next to a dirt road in midday sun. Never before or since had such a vivid vision. I read about the local history of the Japanese invasion of Singapore in World War II and yeah, that crap really happened. Never staying there again. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago after a long fight with cancer about a month before my wedding. I saw her the day before she passed, but due to work I wasn't at the hospital the day of and was pretty upset. After her funeral I dreamt I was at my parents' house, but in the dream it was my friend's house. He was saying to me how there are lots of ghosts in the house, and at that point there's a knock at the door. There's a LED light window by the door and I see an outline of a small lady in a purple wool coat. Something my grandmother wore before she was admitted to hospital. I run to the door and open it to see her standing there. I ask her how she is as I unlock the door and I wake up. At this point I'm completely shaken. I get up to get some water and just process what I dreamt. After about 20 minutes I go back to bed and eventually fall asleep and begin dreaming from the exact point before I wake up, where I unlock the door and see her standing there holding a plate of my favorite food that she would always make whenever I or she visited. I hug her and ask her how she is and she says she's fine and not to be sad because everything is going to be okay. I tell her that I love her and miss her, give her one last hug, and then I wake up. At that point I feel happy, but when I try to tell my wife what I dreamed I completely break down and cry, mostly at the fact that even my dream she brought me a plate of my favorite food. It's hard to explain, but the dream felt extremely real at the point where I saw and spoke to her. Prior to that, when speaking to my friend, it felt like a normal dream. If she did visit me, I'm so glad I got one last chance to say goodbye. A friend was 1/3 owner of a B&B. She said it was haunted. The ghost, I forget her name, moved decorations and changed people's alarm clocks. I didn't really believe it. The men's bathroom was off the bar. The women's was around 3 corners and through the restaurant. We'd always been there after hours, so I always used the men's room. One night we were there for dinner, then went to the bar. I went to the men's bathroom. When I came out, everyone was staring at me. Apparently the ghost had screamed. I didn't hear it and have always wondered why no one checked on me, if it really happened. When I was a baby, my mom and grandma heard someone say hi to me from the baby monitor, and she and my grandma ran upstairs to see nothing there, and we think it was my grandpa that died before I was born saying hi to me. When I was around 7, my parents would leave all of my toys in the living room. One night my nan was looking after me, because my parents had to go on a business trip somewhere overseas. It was around 9 at night and my nan was lying in bed watching TV with me when I hear around 10 of them go off at the same time, the sound coming from the basement. When my nan heard them, she went down to see what was up, but there was nothing there. Another time, and this happened recently, my parents asked me to turn the lights off at their shop. So I go to do that, and when the lights do go off I hear footsteps coming down the stairs from the 2nd floor. I turned the lights back on to see if it was one of my siblings, but nobody was there. Don't worry, it was just Woody on his horse. I was sleeping over at a friend's house when I was in middle school. Giant Victorian historic tour of homes kind of home with lots of ghost stories. Voices woke me up in the middle of the night and I saw 2 or 3 shadows standing over my sleeping friend. I must have rustled a bit because the moment they realized I was watching them they turned toward me and I screamed like the world was ending. The house was large, his parents didn't hear me, but my friend ran over. Said I woke him from a dream about getting murdered, and about 20 years later he was. What the? When I was 9 I stayed up for about 3 days cause it was summer break and my grandma was at my house and she died in her sleep, so we called the police and they took her. I couldn't sleep that night, then I went to the mirror and looked at myself and seen her instead. This was crazy. I can't find a logical explanation for it to this day. So I got into a taxi with my mum. The taxis where I come from carry like 14 passengers. And a few minutes after the driver started, my mum got a headache. It kept getting worse and she tells the guide to stop the vehicle and we get off. She buys a bottle of water and her head clears. So we board another taxi. Like 20 minutes into the journey, we find that an accident had occurred ahead. Literally no survivors. And it was the taxi we had boarded first. I really don't know how we survived that. But as my mother will tell you, it was all God. Theory: taxi had carbon monoxide leak from exhaust. Mom's headache saved her. Driver passed out and crashed after you two exited. This happened to a coworker. He almost got arrested for driving drunk, but it was CO poisoning. This probably wasn't supernatural tbh, but it was definitely creepy. A few years ago, me and a friend were driving back to my house late at night, like around 1:30 am or 2 am. Coincidentally, we had passed a local cemetery less than a mile before the part of the road this happened on. We were on this road that isn't a super busy main road, but also isn't hidden or a back road or anything. It's just a normal road, and it cuts through an area where there are houses on both sides of the road, then loops around to a roundabout and splits off into two roads that are more like main, well-traveled roads. This was summertime in Alaska, so even though it was the middle of the night it wasn't pitch black outside, just kind of twilighty. So we pass the cemetery, continue on for about half a mile, then come to a little curve in the road. It was a relatively well lit little curve as there were street lights all around, and a bike path that went into a tunnel, and the tunnel is always very well lit. So anyway, we come around the curve and we were talking, when suddenly this woman steps seemingly out of nowhere directly into the road. Neither of us saw her before she was suddenly in the road, and she was very creepy looking. She was dressed like a Halloween witch, long black dress with long sleeves that covered her hands, and she had long, very messy black hair that was sticking out all over her face and torso. She turned to look at us and kind of glared at us, even though she was the one who just stepped out into the road, and her skin was as white as paper. Her eyes were really dark and beady looking, and she had really heavy black eye makeup on. I of course slammed on the brakes, and me and my friend both exclaimed in surprise when we saw her. She turned away from us after glaring at us and continued crossing the street onto the bike path on the other side. Like I said, the bike path and the tunnel it led to were very well lit, but she just sort of disappeared after that. The whole thing was so strange. I believe in supernatural stuff, but this didn't exactly seem supernatural to me, but it was still very freaky and unexpected. Not the same experience, but similar to mine, involving a young woman, evil vibe, and disappearing into the shadows. A see-through little girl just standing in my room staring at me as I went to go in my room to go to bed. I feel like I worded that weird. One time my family was driving around at night around Christmas. I forget what for, visiting someone or seeing decorated houses. No clue. Could have sworn I saw a real deer or dog head in the road. No other remains. I tried to point it out because it was so weird. I was ignored. Being a kid, I was stuck in the car anyway, so it's not like I could have hopped out to go see if that's what it was or not. I'm not sure if that counts as supernatural or if it was a precursor to me needing glasses. Shortly after my father died at home, we had a radio in the room that he died in that would turn on at 11:58 every night for 5 years. He didn't die at 11:58, he died in the morning, but we could never get that radio to stop turning on at that time. We unplugged it, we eventually moved it to the basement, and it stopped after we did that. A couple years ago during late fall, I was sitting on my bed reading a book when a slow thud started happening in my mattress right under me. It got stronger and faster until it sounded and felt like there was a giant heart beating in the middle of it. It started shaking my legs and it got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I got up and grabbed my mom from her room, telling her what happened, and asked if she could make sure I wasn't going crazy. She came in and immediately heard it. She put her hand down on my bed and felt the beating as well. We ended up taking apart my bedding and mattress trying to find anything that could do that. It was still beating until we put my mattress back on my bed. Never found a reason why it happened, and it never occurred again. The family that had lived in the house before us lost the dad to heart problems late fall, then moved out, and the family before them also went through the same thing. We always had a burst of activity in the house during the fall and winter months. Happened when I was 14 and my youngest sister was 3. We were all pretty confident the house was haunted, but none of the spirits were harmful. There was a grandfather, grandson, and, believe it or not, cat ghosts. The grandson was a small boy, maybe 6, was very mischievous and had visited me for several years at this point. So on this one particular night, I remember waking up because the boy was nudging me and trying to get me up so we could play. I think he was also doing this to my baby sister. I finally wake up and he was above me giggling. My sister started to stir and cry a bit and then the boy disappeared. I pretended to stay asleep in the hopes that my sister would go back to sleep. No luck though when she fussed and sat up in her bed. She did this for about a minute. I'm still remaining quiet. And she stops mid-cry, looks out into the middle of the room, and says, "Kitty." We had cats at the time but they were not in the room. I looked. She then calls for the kitty and a few seconds later just starts petting the air. I'm just laying in my bed shocked and processing. She's petting the ghost cat. She continues to pet the ghost cat for a minute, even giggles a bit before I finally call out to her and ask if she's okay. She stops, looks at me, quickly looks back down and then swiftly towards the door as if the ghost cat had run away, and then immediately bursts into a loud crying session. So yay, I've seen ghosts before but I've never seen someone interact with a ghost in front of me that I couldn't see. It was super strange. I'm pretty sure I met a Skinwalker one time. If anyone wants the story I'm happy to tappy it out, but I am at work on my phone. I'll write it out when I get back home in an hour or so. It was when I was working in NW Queensland and driving from Burketown to Normanton, and there was a crossing over one of the rivers. I forget the name of the crossing as it was a while ago. Anyway, I hated driving over it. I always felt I wasn't welcomed there. It was just one of those feelings of just get out of here as I should not be here. I later found out that an Aboriginal massacre happened there. It all made sense and I don't blame the traditional owners of the past not wanting me there. As a white man, my white British ancestors did a lot of horrible things to the traditional owners of this land. Every night for weeks I kept waking up at 3:33 am. On a night my partner was working out of town, I decided to set up some bedding on the lounge room floor and have a movie night with my 2 children, Monique 6 FABD, William 4 meters. We all fell asleep on the floor. I was having a very vivid dream. Everything felt real. My sister-in-law and I were in a house. In the long hallway, we were going over our plan. We had to kill someone. All I knew, this person was horrifically terrible and we were scared our plan wouldn't work. We had set up a bomb in the hallway. She was going to be down one end hiding in a room. I down the other end peeking through a crack in the door, detonator in hand. I heard movement in the hallway and hit the detonator. The explosion blasted through my door sending me backwards. My ears were ringing so loudly, my vision blurred and I struggled through the smoky hallway to the door of the room my sil was hiding in. I was beating on the door, calling her name, crying out, "Are you okay?" Suddenly, I took a massive knock to the head. I dropped, passed out. I was being doused in liquid. I could taste and smell petrol. I looked up at the person dousing me. It was a tall, slim woman, in her early 20s, long thin sandy blonde hair, wearing a flannelette shirt and dirty jeans. And she hated me. I could feel it. It was powerful. She had a match in one hand and the box in the other. She struck the match and smiled at me as she dropped it. As it was falling, slow motion, I screamed, "Don't you fucking dare." I was getting up to tackle her when I forced myself out of the dream. Here's where it gets supernatural. I woke up, was completely awake. I noticed the time on the wall clock, 3:33 am. I didn't feel alone, and I don't mean my 2 kids. I looked over at the lounge and there she was, the woman from my dream. She was dressed the same, sitting forward with her leg crossed. She was looking down at her hands. She had a cigarette packet in one hand and in the other a cigarette. She was tapping on the packet. There was a red glow around her, and the whole energy in the room was filled with her. Extreme for me. I was terrified. I knew it wasn't my daughter, because I was looking at the woman. But I asked Monique, "Is that you?" The woman looked up at me. Frick, she hated me. I have no idea why she hated me, but she did, with a passion. staring at me. She started to lean back into the couch. The red glow faded, and it was like she disappeared into the shadows. Of course I stayed up for the rest on the night, all lights on, TV on. That was the last night I woke up at 3:33 am. 20 years later, I haven't dreamt about her since and have yet to meet someone who looks like her. But I do think about her from time to time. I'd love to know what PPL think she may have been. I've only had one other supernatural experience. Definitely not connected though. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.